Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you again. We were in for a real treat tonight. We have Ensemble Signal here performing a really exciting program with a wide variety of music. And tonight I'm joined by conductor Brad Lubman, co-artistic director of the Ensemble Signal, and composer Luca Francesconi, who was the recipient of a commission that's being premiered tonight. So please join me in welcoming them. First of all, it's just such a treat to finally have you here. It feels like this project has been in the works for 3 years or so. It's been a long time coming, so it's nice for it to finally come to fruition. And I thought we could maybe just start with talking a bit about each of the pieces that are on the program and then just kind of seeing where the conversation goes from there. One thing that developed a bit late in the process was the addition of a work by Oliver Knussen, and who unfortunately passed away just this past year. And I'm wondering if maybe, Brad, you could say a few words about your relationship with Knussen, what drew you to this particular piece, and something like that.
Yes, gladly. Well, not gladly, because it was unfortunate that Ollie passed away is July, and it was sudden. I was Oliver Knussen's assistant conductor at the Tanglewood Music Center. Ollie ran the Festival of Contemporary Music from, I think it was 1986 to about 1993 or 4, and I was his assistant from 1989 until 1994. And this was a tremendous, he was, for me, a really great mentor, friend, and he was really one of our greatest conductors, period. We, Signal had the chance to work with him at a portrait concert some years ago in New York, and he was a very, very important, close person, friend, mentor for Signal. So we really felt that we wanted to honor his memory in some way. Also, I know that he was here.
Yeah, we had him here in 2014.
Right.
He had a residency here. He helped us select, we had a commission by Mark Nykrug, a trio,
right.
But he also came and conducted a few of his pieces, Ophelia Dances, the Schoenberg Serenade, a few other things. I picked some pieces by Ruth Crawford. It was a fantastic series of programs.
Right, I'm sure it was. And so part of it was the instrumentation. We sort of built the program based on Schoenberg, Pierrot, lunaire, because the manuscript lives here. And then the instrumentation for Luca's piece grew out of that, and this seemed like something. Also, we had played this earlier in the season. It's also a really great piece, and so there you go. That's how it all evolved.
Yeah. So this piece, it's called Songs Without Voices, and there isn't a voice. So that's kind of there's a little bit. You'll see a note in the program about it, but. Do you find that this? There's that English horn melody that's so amazing. But does it feel like a vocal work that's been in instrumental form, or?
Well, I know a little bit about. Maybe it's in the program notes, but I remember when I conducted the piece for the first time, it was virtually brand new. Ollie had done the premiere. I think it was 1992, I believe. And at Tanglewood, I never knew what I was about to conduct at Tanglewood until Ollie showed up, late June, early July, which meant that I usually had about a week or two to learn the repertoire. And I was okay with that. I don't know why. For some reason, I enjoy the challenge. And so we would go and meet, and he would sift through this pile of scores. Well, you do this, and I'll do this. And that particular summer, it was really quite incredible. What an honor to have the composer, I looked up to him so much to say, and why don't you do this? I already did the premiere with the Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society. So I remember asking him this exact question, so how is it Songs Without Voices? And the reason is that he used the poetry of Walt Whitman from which to derive syllable by syllable, word by word. So in the first movement, there's a place where the horn, you'll notice it's a very prominent entrance, comes in with something, and there was Ollie singing to me the words of the Whitman poem, which I don't remember. It was, 1992 was a few years ago, so I don't remember which poem it was, but he sang word for word, how he set the text, and this was the device that he used throughout the piece. So it's text setting without actually setting the text for a singer. So that's hence Songs Without Voices.
Interesting. Did you, at the time, were you studying just conducting with him, or did you have any composition lesson with him? Or?
I didn't study conducting with him. I studied conducting with nobody. I'm basically self-taught. I did have a fellowship in composition at Tanglewood one of the summers I was there. It was not that one. It was an earlier one. So I was, I was being his assistant. The other thing about being Ollie's assistant is it wasn't the typically for assistant conductors, is they sit in the audience with the score, hoping the conductor of the week will get sick, so that they could, I mean, it's, it's kind of how it goes. I never was that. No, I never had an assistantship, and this one at Tanglewood was different because Ollie actually gave me, there was so much repertoire in those days. The Festival of Contemporary Music was 3 weeks long in those days. So he would always have me actually conducting stuff. So there were very few rehearsals. I did attend some of his rehearsals, and I sat there and I observed and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I didn't, I learned from watching him, and I, of course, learned from studying his own pieces, but I didn't actually study conducting with him.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we have both of you here have backgrounds in both composition and conducting, and maybe Luca, can you say a bit about the other side of your world first before we get into your piece about your work as a conductor? And did you ever have any encounters with Knussen?
We met not. Yeah, I met him a few times. He never did my music, unfortunately. But we have now. I was thinking we had another link with Tanglewood because I was there with Pierrot as a fellow composer in '82, so 10 years before. And so I shared this experience, which was very strong for me, especially with Luciano Berio, who remained sort of, I was an assistant of his, and I had the chance to conduct several times rehearsals before he took the baton, and then the final. For instance, in La Scala, I did the vocal score of his opera La Vera Storia, which was premiered in La Scala in '92. And so before that, he gave me this bunch of huge papers with the orchestra score, and I was panicking because when you have a blank page of notes and you have to write the vocal score, you have to pick up possibly the right notes. Right. And but it was an incredible lesson because I had to take this responsibility, and then I was conducting and playing the piano for all the rehearsals for all the singers, so instructed the singers, and finally the last 3 weeks the orchestra came. So I had an incredible orchestration lesson because all the choices I did before, when I had to choose, pick up the right notes from his score and put it in the piano score, then I could compare if I was wrong or not. And it was unbelievable. You could see, oh yeah, the clarinet, you see how it sticks out, and the horn here, you can't hear them. It was, this is how, so I started, I already started before, but what is very important for a composer, I think, because that was my main, it's been always my main goal and my only real necessity. We talk about necessity here, really. But it's very important, especially for today's composer, to be into the music physically. And I really would suggest any composer to conduct, or at least playing. I played a lot of music when I was a kid, from jazz, rock, and jazz. I was a particular fan of Miles Davis' electric period. And that was very important. I mean, and this is, I miss it a lot. And in recent years, I've been, dropping almost everything about conducting because composing, if you take it seriously, is really very demanding.
Sure. Did you do more of this type of reduction work? I don't like to call it reduction, more like transcription, or was that kind of a one-off situation for you, just out of curiosity?
No, that was the only one, but I had a chance to do many other works for Berio. He wouldn't, I mean, it was not teaching, it was like a Renaissance, bottega, it was really like working. He would say, do this. It was a little bit like Miles Davis, I must say. Yeah. hey, do this. and I said, well, and then, have you finished? Almost. There's no almost, just yes or no. He was like that. So you have to run, just simply, as simple as that. So it was very, very, I think it's the only way to learn something, really. Otherwise, it becomes really speculation, intellectual speculation. This is something that we know from the, what I call the paleo avant-garde. Which doesn't mean that we have to go back. I mean, this is the important thing about this piece also, which is I took big risks also because otherwise I should work like a bank clerk, and not like. I mean, composing is taking risks, and this is my. I don't think they would accept me as a bank clerk anyway. You need some specific competences that I don't have. But in any case, this idea of we live in a moment in which you really need to have a necessity to give a form, a shape, without going back and without speculating too much. But going back means like writing tonal music, which is it's an easy way out if you want. You can do that, but I always prefer the originals for some reasons. Like Mozart or Brahms, and it's not a matter of going backwards, but it's more like put this incredible flood of informations we are exposed to nowadays. I feel it like in a grinder, a mental grinder. So you have to have a bank of cultural and filters, I would say mental tools, which come from our tradition. Yes, this comes, not the old avant-garde or but the specificity of Western culture, which is what I call the Ulysses Syndrome, which is to analyze, to have an active role towards the world, which means you want to know how the thing is working, how nature is working. And this kind of thinking is very old in Western culture, and which has it's a double-edged razor, because on one side, of course, has unleashed a modern thinking which generated science, for instance, the analysis and the formalization of processes. That's mathematics science that's based on this. On the other hand, of course, it became a sort of detachment from nature. I mean, if you want to analyze something, you have to make a step backwards, and in a way you cut at least partially the umbilical cord that keeps you within a unity with the world, with nature, with cosmos, and so on. And this is our big problem nowadays. You're not going to ask a person who lives in Africa why or what. He feels part. He has a completely different attitude. In a way, he's more, how can I say, healthy than we are, mentally. We are posing ourselves since a long time many, many questions. And one of the consequences being that we have lost a lot of spontaneity. We have lost a direct connection with this incredible magical matter, which is the world. And we have always to build intellectual machines, what the ancient Greeks called the techne, the technology of, the rational thinking that wants to explain everything. So what we have lost is spirituality a lot.
How does this, maybe moving into the piece that you wrote for tonight, the trauma etudes, maybe you could speak a bit about what led you to this point, because it comes in the midst of, I know you've been doing some other instrumental works right now, and for Daniel Barenboim, I think, as well, and also for, but also in the midst of operatic writing, so kind of a wide variety of things. But what brought you to the trauma etudes, and maybe you can say a bit about that evocative title and maybe how that intersects with what you were just saying.
Yeah, you said a very, very right thing. Opera is one of the biggest multimedia machines that has been built by man, by a human being, and that's where you can really, find solution for the complexity of the world. So there are many different disciplines, and of course you cannot have take as a model Rossini or Verdi, not even Wagner. So that's where you need to find a synthesis among very powerful different semantic disciplines. One of the things which is really obsessing me, because it's very violent, is this flood of informations that we all undergo every day. It's a sort of kind of hypertrophic semantic, not even semantic, but just data flood, which fills up every single silence, space, rest moment. And this is the trauma I'm talking about, is something I need to I put everything inside. I grind it and I try to, gain something which is, with a word of today, chill out moment. But in fact, if we look back, it's part of the two sides of the Dionysian rituals. One was was connected to burst of energy, and was connected to dance and losing your consciousness. It's also with probably, we don't know, but with alcohol or drugs or strange things that we do at the time. It's pretty well known. The other one, vitalistic. The other one is another state of enchantment, which is static, ecstatic. Ecstasis means that everything is like lethargic. You're in a state of enchantment, which is, these two are two levels of alteration, if you want. And the idea of trauma is, well, connected to a very peculiar situation we live today, where the real trauma, the real traumatic experience is being banned, like death, like aged people, like the real sufferance, the real pain. We don't want to know, we don't want to talk about, we don't want to see it. And the real life has, extruded these things from common life. And the paradox is that we have a traumatic representation everywhere, in every movie, in every pop song, in every talk, so the trauma is everywhere, but only represented with its violence, its blood, its arrogance, and so on. So it's a strange paradox. No, we have extruded it from the real life, and we have filled up the fiction with this. If you think how much violence we consume every day through internet and TV and these things, it's like a compensation of something which is missing.
Brad, in your experience with conducting this work, excuse me, do you, it's, maybe you just have a response to what you just heard. It strikes me that there's, again, this is our first time hearing the work, but I was lucky to be able to hear some of the rehearsals. There's a certain, almost like plateaus of material that are happening that are generally high energy, but even the areas where there's a sort of a respite from the very strong forward moving types of stuff, there's still this kind of latent energy that strikes me as a bit unnerving, just as not in a negative way, but just as it's probably a good thing, because that means I'm an interested listener then. But I was just wondering if you could, I don't know, just speak about what your experience has been.
Well, I think that, Luca, as you sort of described this general attitude, the general feelings, I mean, it's there in the piece, absolutely, clearly there. And David, it's interesting what you say about how the more, let's say, the calm sections, that there's still an undercurrent. That could be maybe because there is no calm anymore. Maybe we can't actually really get that. But that could also be one person's calm is another I mean, when have you all really experienced silence, right? I mean, even right now, there's a hum in the room. I don't know what that is. Wow, such power. I'm going to come here more often. No, but I mean, we are inundated in all places. Even in the waiting room of my doctor's office, there's a large screen TV at a very high volume. It's really offensive. And I asked them, could you please lower the volume? Oh, no, we can't do that. Because this way it protects the patient's privacy. You see, when they're inside, behind the window, the sliding glass, where you can't hear anything anyway, you know, or in supermarkets, or in airports, or in, you know, we're constantly inundated with energy of some sort. So that could be, you know, your read, your take. I find that the calm sections really seem to be just about that. They're absolutely, you get the two opposite sides, as you were saying. Of course, my experience from it is very different because I'm in the midst of it, as any performer or conductor would be, no matter when the piece is written. We have information that's given to us on paper, and we need to get the composer's thoughts and wishes across to the listener. So, of course, I'm privy to, I don't know what it is to experience the piece without knowing it. So, Luca, your description, it's like, yes, it's exactly what you said. It's there in the music.
Well, if I can be really simple, I don't deny the violence of this flood of aggressivity which strikes me every day. And it doesn't make any sense to say, well, that's normal, it's the way it is. So the reaction is that I put it on stage. I take all this stuff and I try to filter out in a sort of self-defense kind of, and you know, trying desperately, if you want, to elaborate this material, this enormous amount of data into a new way of finding a spiritual level, something which is closer to me, closer, as we should say, closer to the origin. To be original is not to be extravagant. To be original is if you can be close or closer to the origin, the original seed, what the ancient Greek called the arche, you know, archetype. This is what nature does spontaneously. Is close to the arche and spontaneously produce. It's leading to the presence, from the non-being to being. Men and human beings, the humans, they don't have this spontaneous capacity of creating life, if you want. But art is it's an attempt. So in a way, you need to more and more to find this level of calm, but not only, but origin. The work of digging into this flood and clean it up is bigger and bigger in a way because of this multiplication of languages, of media, of technology. I really don't know. I wonder sometimes how it could have been in Mozart times, where you needed, like it took like 1 week to reach a concert in Prague and listen to a real piece with a real orchestra, where no disc, no radio, no TV. If you wanted to listen to something real, you had first travel 1 week with horses, or you know. I mean, the timing was completely different, but at the same time, a symphony that was much more present, because a symphony written 6 months before was considered old. Say, okay, no, we don't play that. Let's do a new one. You know, now there are, you know, they do CDs and DVDs. They keep going for ages. You know, even the kids now, they still listen to the Beatles. My child, our children. So it's strange, because with all this speed, you have the feeling that is looping on itself. You know, instead of being real speed, it's just it's an energy that doesn't lead you anywhere. This is very strange.
I wonder if I can come back just a little bit to the talking a bit more about one thing that you haven't really mentioned, which is the use of the word etude. So is this more to whom does that apply? Is that for the performers? Is it for the composer? Is it for the audience? I think that's this element of, you've kind of spoken a little bit about the trauma and the experience of that, but that choice of word struck me as kind of a intriguing one.
I confess that I was drawn into this matter by some American books about the trauma of veterans coming from wars, and it became a subject which was very, very, very discussed. There were a lot of books, and I started reading a little bit of this, and that was the first connection. It was a real, psychopathological problem, psychiatric cures and so on. And then I realized that it was not only for them, but it was something that was spread all over. So it's for me, for sure, first. And then if I can convey this idea of an aggression, you will see, you will hear, it's aggressive. That's what I feel when I am exposed to this amount of data which want to squeeze me and give me an identity, a fake identity. That is the same for everybody. You have to be this, you have to do that, you have to listen to this, you have to buy this car, to buy this phone, to this. There is no space anymore, and so it's getting so difficult to be yourself today. It's a real work to find an identity. That's what I'm trying to explain to my students of composition, for instance. I have a position in Sweden, which is a quite uncontaminated country, which means that they don't have a lot of tools in this sense. And when you have to be simple and you have to explain to someone who is like 20, 25 years old how to cope with this reality, which is so complex and so aggressive sometimes, it's hard because they don't have any reference. And so the only thing I feel like doing is trying to develop this idea, use your brain, try to give them tools to analyze and resynthesize the reality. So don't take their word for it. Try to build your identity. It's not everybody, and the kids especially, they want to have everything immediately. So, and the idea of working on something, and take some time is something completely far from what they even conceive. So this is the idea about trauma etude. The etude is how can you get through this violence, and because the idea of quality, if you think, is completely gone. How do you define quality if you don't have reference points? And this is something that is completely, and it's also a little bit hidden in the politically correctness. When you take everything, then anything is equal to anything else. So one feels to be very free because in his iPod or telephone, he's got the last Lady Gaga and the ninth of Beethoven. But this is not real freedom. It's something else.
That's a very profound statement that you just made. I mean, most of the statements were, but I'm just now thinking about Lady Gaga and the ninth of Beethoven. I mean, I like both, but now you're saying it's not real freedom. I'm very perplexed.
You've said a few things that I'm just kind of thinking through in my head, but earlier today, just kind of backing with this notion of finding an original thought, but then also witnessing the work that went into things that we kind of take for granted. We took a look at a few manuscripts together, which was always a fun experience for me to get to see these things. And in those, a lot of those were fair copies of kind of final draft type materials, but some of them were not, and they had plenty of scratch outs, and you could see the active process there. And there's a certain element of it kind of puts you back in that moment of creation in a way that that makes it feel like it's not such a foreign, distant past. And I'm wondering if this, if you say anything, I don't know if you agree with me or if you have a different experience, or maybe you can just speak about that a bit, both of you.
what was very interesting about seeing these manuscripts, aside from the fact that they're just manuscripts, whatever we were looking at, there was Beethoven, there was Schubert, there was Mendelssohn, there was George Crumb, there was Schoenberg, Pierrot, lunaire, Alban Berg. I mean, and you're just, you can't believe that it's there. But the idea of the scratch copy, or the idea of the working out of material. When I compose directly using Sibelius software. If I am working things out, I shouldn't say nobody, but you won't find it in a sketchbook. And sometimes what I do is I just destroy that which I'm revising on the page. Sometimes there'll be a copy someplace, a file, digital file that will be trying things out. But very often I try things out in the actual score. So it's a little bit strange because I've gotten used to something that I never thought I would, I'm old-fashioned in that way.
Working for the library, I have to say, use save as, don't do the save over, because we like to see that process.
I'm old-fashioned. I'm unconventional. But seeing these manuscripts and that idea of being able to trace, it's like having a recording of when you were maybe first starting out on an instrument, or at least from maybe a few years ago, you're a student and now you're improving, and you go back and you say, let me listen to that recording from when I was 20. Now I'm 25, and you wow, look at the difference. So this really got me thinking about the method of working. In any of the arts, whether you're composing, whether you're writing, you're doing visual art, something like this, of having the tracing, the build-up, and the development. That's one of the things that I sort of came away with. Although mostly it was this kind of stupor, that's the don't touch that. But that's I'm still recovering from it.
Yeah, I was profoundly moved. Moved is the real word. It was moving. Because, notation in music we give it for granted, but is a miracle. I mean, it took a few centuries to get there. And of course, it's not the real thing. And Brad, as a conductor, knows very well when you have to translate into reality what is written. And the idea that you go back, it was almost like a retrograde from even the reproduction of a disc back to a real hand, which was with a pencil. I was moved, because that's what I was doing when I was a student, with the pencil and the eraser. And you see this little bit childish, very, very careful writing of Alban Berg in the violin concerto, and I was like almost crying. I was saying, this is real. It's a reality check in a world where you can't grasp a bit of reality. It's like escaping like smoke, and there it's a sort of psychoanalytical therapy almost. And you say, no, it's there. It exists. It's there. There was a man behind that. And again, it renews my astonishment regarding the possibility of carving, if you want, using a sculptural term, into a piece of paper, something which has no physical dimension. Because when you listen to a piece of music, it's invisible, it's untouchable. I mean, it's a real mystery. I have no explanations, so I am the first one to be amazed. And this idea of putting some little dots, black dots, or even pencil dots on a piece of paper, I think it's really tender. It's moving, and the fact that human beings have been able to build a code of symbols, which by themselves don't mean absolutely nothing. But then there are other people who grab the instruments, they start decodifying, and then the miracle happens. It's just incredible. So this thing you're doing, David, I mean, that's why I love libraries in general. For me, it's extremely relaxing. No, I feel like an healthy person when I'm in a library. Silence, time, space, everything goes back into meaning in a way. The real meaning, and especially this. It was great. It's a great thing.
One thing, just to throw out one comment on this, one thing that I noticed that I didn't know before, or I didn't feel this way before I had a chance to look at some of these primary sources myself, was that there's a sort of, we have this idea of this monumentality of some of these pieces, but when you see that there are alternatives that were attempted or tried that are potentially equally viable or potentially even better had they gone that route, in one's own opinion, it gives a certain human aspect to it. It's hard to, you don't get that just from the printed score, and so it's.
Isn't that an amazing thing? That these highly revered God and goddess-like structures of the past. I mean, and this is not to smash idols, so to speak, but they're human beings. I mean, even Bach and Mozart, which some people say, how could it be? But they were they're kind of normal people, and in trying out things, it's the idea of the infallible, versus the fallible. The fact that okay, the obvious one is Beethoven. We know, and everyone talks about, look at all the scratching out and the trials of that. But even seeing some of these things, like with the George Crumb, one of the great pieces of the past. Quickly do math. 40, more than it's written in 1970. Ancient Voices of Children, and to see some of the working out. It's the same thing as seeing the working out of a Beethoven and the trial and error, or the thing that you say, wait, he really was going to do that? Oh my God, that's a terrible idea. It's a good thing that he crossed it out. It changes. What also changes is when you work with living composers, which I've done a lot. I mean, I've worked with non-living composers too, but they don't answer my emails. When you work with living composers, you learn that if the non-living composers were to come back, there's a very good chance they might say, oh, that thing that you've heard 4 billion times done that way on all those recordings by all those famous people, yeah, I don't think I really meant that. I mean, it's possible. It is possible. Because I've had with many living composers, they'll say, now that I'm hearing it here, or now that it's been 2 years and you've done it X number of times, I think I might want to maybe change this, maybe do that longer, maybe change the tempo. So also seeing the manuscripts today brought that same thing, that it's a more fluid thing. It's not just like, oh, it's this revered thing and this is the only way that it can go. And you're right about libraries and the the silence and the reality and the reality check, yeah.
Luca, do you tend to have a extensive revision process, or do you how does that work for you? Is this something?
Well, sometimes I say that pieces are like cakes. Not always the donut comes with a hole in the right place. Sometimes it happens, and then you don't have to touch anything. It comes out the good way. There are other pieces which drives me nuts. I'm never satisfied. I have like 10, 20 versions, and in the end, well, what did I do? I destroyed the piece, so I go back to the first one. So you never know. I mean, it's really a matter which, even if you consider yourself a professional, which in this field, I mean, as far as performing is concerned, it's possible to say, okay, this guy is really professional. This guy, for composition, you are like a lone knight in the desert, just walking or riding your invisible horse, and you have no reference points, and just maybe one star, and that's it. So how do you know? This is the great risk. Only if you have a completely unstoppable urge into your stomach, you can do this thing, because otherwise you quit before. It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge because it's like, making an examination about all your life every time you have a world premiere or you have a piece played for the first time, and every time you say, well, maybe I did everything wrong. Then in the end it's working, but you have to have this kind of childlike attitude, you never know. And I think this is a way to be alive. You know, never give something for granted, and you're all the time evolving. I never understood people who don't touch a single note what they did. People who don't retouch anything when after. I don't know. There are people as a parti pris. They don't change anything. They don't correct anything.
I mean, I know some composers that have their philosophy is this piece was from that time, even if that time was 6 months ago, you know. And I just need to leave it. And yeah, I don't understand that either, actually, because the piece is in the world, and you have the opportunity to. It's not even a matter of right or what works. I think that's. I think in composition, I don't know that there is such a thing. Just like in performing and conducting, the right tempo doesn't exist. It just doesn't. I mean, I always tell young conductors, let me save you years of of trauma, because you don't know what the right tempo is. What was the right tempo to you in one moment? You get the recording from that performance that you say, man, I got all the tempos right, and then you get the recording the next day and everything sounds wrong. And then you listen a week later, and the first movement sounds right, but the second movement sounds right. And then you listen a year later, and none of it's good. And then 10 years later, you say, oh my God, it's the best thing I ever did. I mean, and in a way, it's the same thing even in the creative process. I don't know that you can ever really, get what is getting it right. It's only, I think, in the moment, and I think the pieces that didn't come out, like the perfect donut, which is, I really like that image very, very much, the ones that you want to go back to, I think that's the right thing to do. But you might be going back to it, as you said, maybe very, very often. And I think it's as we said before, it's more of a fluid thing. I don't know that there's a way to get an absolute about it.
Well, I thought maybe we could speak a little bit about Pierrot lunaire, and then
What's that?
Just a point of reference for everybody who may not know this, but Gertrude Clark Whittall, who's the one who built this pavilion that we're in right now, and gave us 5 Stradivari instruments on the wall over there. She also purchased from Arnold Schoenberg in 1950 Pierrot lunaire for Claire Nacht and the Second String Quartet, and gave them to the library, and that's how we came to be in possession of this amazing manuscript that is on display tonight, by the way, and. So we looked at that a little bit earlier, and this is just kind of one of those pieces that's just, for some reason, for lots of reasons, it's a turning point kind of a piece, or a piece that's always looked at as a focal point for lots of reasons. It's maybe too much to get into right now, but what's it like I feel like our program tonight has the personal connection with Knussen, the historical connection with Schoenberg, and then the living, breathing connection here with a new piece. That sort of what is it like to kind of approach the Schoenberg in this context?
In this context, the Schoenberg is a very old piece. I call it the old masterwork, the old tonal piece. Yes, I think it's tonal. It's not tonal in the real sense, but that's just me. And I know I said I'm old-fashioned, but at the same time, I really do sometimes look back at these works. No, I think it's one of the greatest works of all time, but we can say that about many, many pieces. It's a pivotal work. It's a seminal work. What's interesting is that 2 pieces that came from around the same time approximately, Schoenberg's Pierrot lunaire and Stravinsky's L'Histoire du Soldat. What's interesting is that those are the kind of quintessential early 20th century works for many, many reasons. The work that then defined the contemporary chamber ensemble starting around the 1960s and is Pierrot lunaire, and there's even a term in the business. You say, oh, that piece, yes, I've heard it's really cool, let's program it. What's the instrumentation? Pierrot plus percussion. I mean, this is like Pierrot, it's for Pierrot. Oh, is there a singer? No, Pierrot plus percussion. Now, there are many great pieces for Pierrot plus percussion. I've conducted many of them. Billions of composers have written. How come L'Histoire du Soldat, that instrumentation? Okay, it's a little bit stranger. There are 7 players instead of 5 or 6. The Stravinsky L'Histoire is violin, bass, clarinet, bassoon, trumpet, trombone, percussion. I mean, that's really cool. But I always said it's interesting how Schoenberg's piece became a sort of a model type of piece. Now, in the context of tonight, I mean, I really do feel like it's the Beethoven Symphony on the program. And I did a program recently someplace else, orchestral program. And the first half was a piece by Claude Vivier, great Canadian composer from the 1970s, called Siddhartha, big 30-minute piece. Orchestra's divided into 8 different groups on stage, craziness. Intermission, Elliott Carter Violin Concerto, and then we ended with Ives' Three Places in New England, the Beethoven Symphony of the evening, not the opening, like, okay, I got to go listen to some Ives now. I mean, I really do think that the Ives' Three Places in New England is the Beethoven Symphony of our time. It's old music. Yeah. And the Schoenberg also, it's old. So in the context of the program, actually, I think just in the context of anything, when I approach the Schoenberg, to me, I feel like, well, it's Mahler in some ways, it's Brahms. And in the context of the program, it's actually a very interesting connection. I think even if one doesn't sense immediate connections from one piece to the next, I think that in a way it's like we're indebted to certain things about the Schoenberg, even if it isn't to the tonal, or if you want to call it atonal language, even if it isn't to the dramatic, there's always something about that piece that we're indebted to it for many, many ways, aside from the fact that it's a very heavily studied work.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I looked down at my clock and I noticed that we're already at 7:15 or a little bit later. And so I'm wondering, I just want to give people a chance if you have any questions. If you could just wait for a microphone to come to you, we'd love to take some questions. We have one right up here.
My question is regarding the trauma etudes and the process of putting it together between composer and Brad and the Ensemble Signal. How much working through things as the piece was being written was there done, or is it something that Luca, you wrote and then Brad received the score and it began to build the piece from there?
Brad received the score and fainted.
No, actually, I didn't.
No, not the first time, because you were leaving. When you came back,
We were going out of literally out the door. Oh, look at that! The package came, and they're like, wow, this looks great. This is an amazing piece. No. I mean, I think that the answer is that the piece was written. There was some conversation about instrumentation and things like this and duration, But in I don't know if one could say it's 50% of the time or not, but in many cases, the piece is written, it's delivered, and then you take it from there. There are some times that there'll be some workshopping, or if it's a small group and the composer that's able to come and maybe try things out. I don't know if you have worked that way, but in this case, it was, here's the piece, and then we took it from there.
It's very important to know the performance you're working for. It's really deluxe, because in many cases, especially with opera, you never know who's going to sing, and the casting is changing all the time. I'm preparing an opera for the Barisci Staatsoper. I'm doing a trilogy. I started with La Scala, with an opera that also Brad conducted in Buenos Aires, Porto, Quartet, from Heine Müller. We were in the famous Cologne, which is an incredible place, really. Then Porto and Strasbourg, right? Another production. There is Brad, there is Lauren in this piece, there is a Signal, there is this place, there is David also. You can. I think it's very nice to have this. You're less alone when you work, and there is always. I must say this because it happens every single time that performers are like truffle dogs. Even orchestral performers who are not particularly motivated for contemporary music, to say it very mildly, they get. I'm talking about my music. They get the week in which they know that on Friday they will have to play a contemporary piece, and so they start the week already. On Monday they are bad temper. They feel bad. So they say, oh, okay, let's see the start. Okay, like truffle dogs, if there is a bit of music inside, they just feel it. They don't know the language, it's very difficult, whatever it is, but they start, well, let me see. Oh, that's cool. Oh, let's try. Yeah. And then they do it. So this is to say that you don't need words. If there is this strange component, they feel it. So it's really incredibly, because of all the things we said before, it's physical. And what happens with my scores every time, because you said it, but I was prepared to that, the first look is intimidating because it looks incredibly difficult. But then the more if you get a little bit into it, you see that all the musical figures and forms and shapes and intentions and drive and thing is absolutely understandable. And after a while, it's even instinctive. And the difficulty disappears, even in big orchestral pieces where you don't have performance at your level, if you want, or at least committed that much. So there must be another mystery behind that. So finally, but that's why also for the audience I would like to say one thing. If I would suggest a way to listen to this music, which is, of course, it's, if you want, aggressive, a little bit strange, a little bit weird, not always aggressive, but still, I mean, if you look around you, I mean, the world we work is not a fair and tender world. So I'm just writing down what I feel. But I strongly suggest to listen with your belly and not with your brain. Can I say that?
Yeah. You can say that again.
Listen with your belly.
This is, I know there's not much time, but this is an important thing, and I'll say it very, very quickly, and that's that I think people think that there needs to be some understanding of anything, of everything. You don't need to understand a thing. Even about when you hear Mozart Jupiter Symphony and you hear the 5-part fugue in the finale, who here on first listen identified it as a 5-part fugue? Except for Robert Levin, the great Mozart scholar, you identify something, wow, that was amazing. Then you study it or you read about it. Oh, that's a 5-part fugue, that's why. I think there has to be something that grabs you. It doesn't matter if you understand it or you can intellectualize it. Just so say, listen with your belly and not with your brain. That's really great.
I'm absolutely sure that since there are so many things that we cannot explain about music, I do believe that there is a sort of pure energy, which is traveling in the space, and no matter in which language this is shaped, if the energy is there, which means that when you compose the piece, you had the same state of vibration and alteration, because it's a state of like possession in a way. If you have experienced this, then it will come through the piece to the audience. You don't have to think to something that you already know. It's pure energy, I've seen this. We have seen my companion and me these fabulous films at the Space Museum yesterday. We just let it go. It was like, that's more or less the same. I mean, it's pure energy.
There's a lot of pure energy in a lot of your piece.
Well, thank you. It's a big compliment. I mean, I try not to intellectualize. I mean, there is a lot of work behind, structural work, but as with great performers, if you take, I don't know, Pollini or Bernstein, there is a miracle also happening, like the difficulty disappears. Difficulties of technical problems, they disappear. Right. Looks like the easiest thing in the world, and this fades out, and the music appears with effortless, without any effort, and this is fantastic. So you have to go beyond. I mean, I don't want to explain how I made it, or the structures and so on. Of course, we can do it together if you want. We can meet and I can tell you something more. But that's not what you have to forget about it. Just get the energy.
I agree.
There was a friend of mine, a student of Eco, the semiologist, who said, he was one of his best students, and he's a melomaniac, a specialist in music. He knows everything. If you go on vacation with him, he brings the opera omnia for organ of Bach, and the tetralogy. And so, stay away from me. I want to go to the beach, and he's spending hours with the headphones. What do you think about this movement of the third opera? I don't think anything. I just want to take a swim. Okay, these kind of guys. He say, there's something strange happening with your music. Every time a piece of yours is about to start, I stay there and I focus with my brain. Now I have to understand. Then the piece starts, and after a few seconds, I'm hit by the music here. So he wants to understand rationally, but then hopefully this energy comes over him, and it bombs from the back. So it's a good compliment, I think.
Wear your collars up, maybe. If we have time for one more question, if there is one. But there's one right over here, Mike.
And less a question, but just a real appreciation. Thank you so much for a mere layperson who, David always leads these really amazing technical discussions, and you all brought such humanity to it that it.
We're not as smart as David is.
I know, and it makes it more approachable because it's so, with these technical discussions, you clean one or two little things, but it's so over my head, and it's so nice to kind of have images. I got images of Amadeus and Shakespeare in Love when you guys talked about the humanity of this creative process, and thank you.
But we need these guys.
Yeah, that's right.
We do nothing without them.
Well,
I wouldn't be here, for instance.
Well, please join me in thanking our guests for speaking with us.